What if the oldest story ever written is not about the beginning? What if it is about the ending? About the day the world drowned? About the last moments before everything was washed away? About survivors clinging to fragments of memory, trying desperately to write down what they could remember before they too were forgotten? Imagine standing in the ruins of a museum storage room, dust thick in the air, shelves stacked with wooden boxes. Inside those boxes, wrapped in cloth, are pieces of clay, brown, cracked, covered in tiny marks that look like bird footprints pressed into wet mud. Each piece fits in your hand. Light, fragile, older than the pyramids, older than anything you have ever touched. These are not decorations, not art. These are words. The first words humans ever wrote down, pressed into soft clay over 5,000 years ago by people who knew something we have forgotten. That memory dies, that languages disappear, that entire civilizations can be erased, and the only way to survive that kind of ending is to write your most important truths in something that cannot burn, cannot rot, cannot be washed away. Clay. When you bake clay, fire cannot destroy it, water cannot dissolve it, time cannot erase it. You can bury it under a city, you can bury a city on top of it, and 5,000 years later, someone will dig it up, brush off the dirt, and read your words as if you wrote them yesterday. The people who made these tablets were called Sumerians. They lived in the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, in what is now Iraq, and they did not write about kings or wars or taxes, though they wrote about those things too. What they wrote about again and again, in city after city, was the flood. Not a small flood, not a river overflowing its banks. The flood, the one that covered mountains, the one that drowned the world, the one that divided all of time into two pieces, before and after, the one that destroyed everything and forced the few who survived to start over from nothing, from memory, from broken pieces, from ruins buried under water and mud. And here is the part that should make you sit up and pay attention. These tablets do not describe the flood as myth, not as a story told by grandmothers to scare children into behaving. They describe it as history, as something that really happened, to real cities, to real people. They name the cities that were lost. They describe the world before the water came. They talk about kings who ruled those cities, about knowledge that existed then, about a time so ancient that even the Sumerians, the people who invented writing, called it the time before, the age when the gods still walked on earth, when the first cities were built, when humans learned everything they needed to know, not slowly, not through thousands of years of trying and failing, but suddenly, as if someone taught them, as if the knowledge had existed before, had been lost, and then had to be remembered. Before we go deeper, before we open the clay and read what is written there, stop for a moment. Like this video. Subscribe if you are someone who feels pulled toward the old mysteries, the questions no one wants to ask, the evidence that does not fit the easy answers. And leave a comment. Tell me where you are, what time it is, what part of the world holds you right now. I want to imagine this story traveling through the night, slipping quietly into rooms across the planet, reaching the ones who are ready to hear it. Let me take you to a place. Southern Iraq summer. The year is 1922. The heat is brutal, the kind that makes the air shimmer, that bakes the ground so hard it cracks. A British man named Leonard Woolley stands beside a deep pit. Around him local workers lean on shovels, wiping sweat, waiting. They have been digging for weeks. Down through layers of brick and pottery, down through the ruins of houses, down through graves where ancient kings were buried with gold and jewels and servants killed so they could serve in the afterlife. Woolley is not like the other archaeologists who came before him. He does not want treasures to fill museums. He wants to understand. He wants to know who lived here, when, why. So he goes slow. He writes everything down, every fragment of pottery, every shift in the color of the dirt, every tiny clue. And then 40 feet down something happens. The workers hit a layer where there is nothing. No pottery, no tools, no bones, no ash from cooking fires, just clean smooth mud. River mud. The kind left behind when water sits for a long time and then slowly drains away. But this is not a thin layer, not one season's worth. This mud goes down 8 feet, 8 solid feet of nothing. As if the world stopped, as if everything living was erased. As if water covered this place for so long that every trace of human life was washed away, buried, forgotten. Woolley stares into the pit. He is a careful man, a scientist, not someone who jumps to conclusions, but he knows what he is looking at. This is not normal. Rivers flood every year in Mesopotamia, they always have, but those floods leave thin layers, an inch, maybe 2. This is 8 feet of pure silt. That is not a flood, that is a catastrophe. He orders the workers to keep digging, down through the mud, and on the other side, beneath it, they find something that makes Woolley's heart beat faster. More pottery, more tools, but different, older styles, different kinds of clay, made by different hands. As if one group of people lived here, built homes, made pottery, lived their lives. And then the water came, drowned them, buried them. And centuries later, maybe thousands of years later, other people came. Built a new city on top of the old one, never knowing what lay beneath their feet. Never knowing an entire world was buried under the ground they walked on. Wooly wipes his face, looks at his notes, and writes in careful handwriting, "We have found evidence of the flood. Not a flood, the flood. The one described in the oldest stories. The one the Sumerians wrote about on their tablets. The one that appears in the Bible as Noah's flood, though the Bible version was written 1,000 years after the Sumerian one. The flood that people 5,000 years ago remembered with such terror that they carved the story into clay and baked it hard so no one would ever forget." News spreads. Newspapers around the world print headlines. British archaeologist finds proof of biblical flood. Some people believe, some doubt. But the 8-foot layer of mud is real. The two civilizations, one below the flood line and one above, are real. And slowly, as more tablets are translated, as more cities are dug up, a picture emerges. The flood was not a story. It was an event. Something that actually happened. Something so terrible that 5,000 years later, people were still writing about it. Still afraid of it. Still trying to make sure no one forgot. But the tablets do more than describe the flood. They describe what came before. And that is where the story gets strange. The oldest flood account is carved on a tablet called the Eridu Genesis. Eridu was the first city, according to the Sumerians, the place where everything started, where kingship, as they said, was lowered from heaven. The tablet is broken now, pieces missing, but what survives tells a story that feels uncomfortably real. It begins before cities existed. Humans lived scattered, wild, no kings, no laws, no order. Then the gods decided to teach them how to plant seeds, how to build walls, how to live together without killing each other. Cities were founded, Eridu first, then others, and humans multiplied, spread across the land, filled the valleys between the rivers. But then humans became too many, too loud. The tablet uses that exact word, loud, not just in sound but in presence, in chaos, in the noise of life itself. And one of the gods, Enlil, the god in charge, could not sleep. He was disturbed, annoyed. Angry, he called a council and said, "There are too many of them. We must reduce their numbers." First, he tried disease. Plagues swept through the cities. Many died, but the survivors had children. The population grew back. So Enlil tried drought. He stopped the rain, dried the rivers, let the crops fail, let humans starve. And again, many died, but some survived, and those who survived learned to dig wells, to find water underground, to irrigate their fields. They adapted. Enlil grew furious. He called another council. This time, his solution was final. A flood, not a small one, total, complete. Open the gates of heaven, break open the fountains of the deep. Let water rise until it covers everything, every field, every mountain. Drown it all, let the world go silent. The gods agreed. They swore an oath. None of them would warn the humans. Let them die in their sleep. But one god, Enki, could not accept this. Enki was the one who had taught humans many things, who had helped them survive the plagues and the droughts. He felt responsible, but he had sworn the oath. He could not warn them directly, so he did something clever. He went to the reed house of a man named Zusudra, a king of one of the cities, a good man. And Enki stood outside the house and spoke, not to Zusudra, to the wall, loudly, as if talking to himself. "A flood is coming," Enki said to the wall. "The gods have decided. The waters will rise. Everything will be drowned. But someone could survive. If someone were to build a boat, a large boat, this many cubits long, this many wide, sealed with tar, strong enough to hold a family, animals, seeds, tools, that someone might live through what is coming." Inside the house, Zusudra heard every word. He understood, and he obeyed. The tablet says he worked quickly. He gathered materials. He built the boat exactly as Enki described, long, wide, tall, sealed tight. He brought his family inside. He brought animals, so there would be creatures left after the flood. He brought seeds of every plant, grain, vegetables, fruit, so the world could grow again. And he waited. Then it began. Rain, not ordinary rain, rain that did not stop. That fell harder and harder until the sound was like thunder. The rivers rose, spilled over their banks, covered the fields, then the villages, then the cities. The water kept rising, higher and higher, until even the highest hills were under water, until there was no land left, only water, endless water, and everything beneath it, dead. The tablet says it lasted 7 days and 7 nights. When it finally stopped, the world was silent, empty, erased. Zusudra waited inside the boat, listening. The water did not go down quickly. It took time, days. Finally, he opened a small window and sent out a bird, a dove. It flew around and came back because there was nowhere to land. Everything was still underwater. He waited longer. Sent the dove again. This time it came back with a leaf in its beak, green, fresh. Proof that somewhere plants were growing again. Land was appearing. He waited a bit more, then sent out a raven. The raven did not come back. It had found land, found food. It was not coming back. Zusodra opened the door of the boat, stepped out onto mud. The world was empty. Everything that had been was gone, the cities buried, the people dead, the world washed clean. He built a small altar from stones, made a fire, burned meat and incense as an offering. The smoke rose into the sky. The gods smelled it, came down, saw Zusodra alive. Enlil was angry at first. Someone had survived, someone had broken the plan, but the other gods calmed him. They said, "What is done. Let this man live. Let humans try again. But this time we will make sure they do not grow too strong." And so new rules were made. Before the flood, the tablets say, humans lived for hundreds of years. Some lived for thousands. They had time to learn everything, to pass knowledge down perfectly from parent to child. But after the flood, lifespans were cut short. Now humans would live a few decades. Each generation would have to relearn what their parents knew. Memory would fade. Knowledge would be lost. Humans would always be starting over. This story is not the Bible, it is older than the Bible, written on clay in cuneiform script at least 4,000 years ago. But the story is the same. One man, one boat, animals saved, birds sent out to find land, a world drowned, and a fresh start. Scientists have found evidence, not of a global flood covering the entire planet, but of massive regional flooding in Mesopotamia. Core samples drilled from the Persian Gulf show layers of freshwater sediment that washed down from the north around 2,900 years before the Common Era, a huge amount of water, carrying mud and debris, flooding the low-lying areas where people lived. But some scientists think the tablets remember something even older. Around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the world went through massive climate change. Glaciers that had covered the northern hemisphere began to melt. Sea levels rose, not slowly, fast, over 400 feet in just a few thousand years. Coastlines where humans had lived for tens of thousands of years were suddenly underwater. If you lived on the coast back then, you would have watched the ocean rise year after year. You would have moved your village inland, again and again. You would have watched the sea swallow the land where your ancestors hunted, where they fished, where they buried their dead. You would have lost your home. Not in a single day, but in the slow, relentless advance of water that never stopped coming. And eventually you would have had to leave, to go far inland, to the high ground, to the rivers that still flowed, and you would tell your children about the land that was lost, the world that drowned, and they would tell their children. And that memory would pass down through so many generations that by the time someone finally wrote it down, it would sound like myth, like legend. But underneath, the memory, over 200 cultures around the world of flood stories: Mesopotamia, India, China, Greece, Scandinavia, Africa, Australia, North America, South America. All of them describe the same thing: water rising, world ending, a few survivors, starting over. This is not coincidence. This is inherited memory, changed by time and language and retelling. But memory, the Sumerians knew they were not the first. The tablets say so. They talk about the time before, the old days, when the gods walked on earth, when the first cities were built, when knowledge was whole and complete, and then the flood came, and most of it was lost, and the survivors had to rebuild from fragments, from broken pieces, from memory that faded a little more with each generation. This is why they wrote on clay. Because clay lasts. You can smash it, but the pieces remain. You can bury it, but it does not rot. You can burn it, and it only gets harder. The Sumerians understood something we have forgotten: that civilizations fall, that knowledge can be lost, that the only way to outlast disaster is to carve what matters most into something that will survive when everything else is gone. The tablets are still here, in museums, in storage rooms in the ground, waiting. Each one a voice from the ancient world, each one saying the same thing: we were here, we saw the world end, we survived, we rebuilt, and we wrote it down so you would know, so you would remember. So that when it happens again, and it will happen again, someone will have a record, a guide, a memory of how to start over. The tablets do not stop at the flood, they go further. They describe what came before the water, and what they describe should be impossible. Because we have been taught that civilization is young, that it started maybe 6,000 years ago when people learned to farm, when they settled down and built the first villages, when they slowly over thousands of years figured out how to plant seeds, raise animals, make pottery, smelt metal, invent writing. We are told it was gradual, painful, a long, slow climb out of the Stone Age. But the Sumerian tablets tell a different story. They say civilization already existed before the flood. Not primitive villages, not scattered tribes learning to survive, but real cities, with kings, with laws, with temples, with knowledge of the stars and mathematics and medicine. Cities that were old even then, cities that had been standing for thousands of years before the water came and washed them away. The tablets list these cities by name: Eridu, Bad, Tibera, Larak, Shurapak. They describe them as real places with real people. And here is the strange part. Archaeologists have found them, dug into the ruins, and discovered that yes, these cities existed. But when they dig down to the oldest layers, the very bottom, they find something unexpected. The oldest levels are not simple. They are not crude first attempts. They are already sophisticated, already planned, already following patterns that suggest the builders knew exactly what they were doing, as if they had built cities before, somewhere else. And when they came here, they did not start from scratch. They rebuilt what they already knew. At Eridu, the first city, excavators dug down through 19 temples, built one on top of the other, each temple larger than the one below it, the newest at the top, the oldest at the very bottom, and that oldest temple, buried under thousands of years of later construction, dates back over 7,000 years. It is small, just one room, mud brick, but it is not random. It is perfectly aligned to the directions, north, south, west, with precision, and it sits on a raised platform, as if the builders knew this area flooded and wanted to keep the sacred space above the water. Who taught them that? Who showed them how to align a building to the compass points with accuracy? How did the very first people to build a temple already know the things that should take generations to figure out? And when archaeologists dug even deeper, below that first temple, they found older remains, pottery tools, burials, and below that something that sent a chill through everyone who saw it, a thick layer of silt, river mud, water-deposited sediment, just like the layer Woolley found at Ur, proof that Eridu, the oldest city in the world, had been flooded, buried, and then rebuilt on top of the ruins. The tablets describe kings who ruled these pre-flood cities, and the numbers they give are impossible. The first king Alulim ruled for 28,800 years. The second Alongar, 8 kings total. Their reigns added together equal to 41,200 years. These cannot be real lifespans. No human lives that long. So what are these numbers? Some scholars say they are symbolic, that ancient people used exaggeration to show importance. That big numbers meant a very long time, without being literal. But that does not explain why the numbers are so specific. Why not just say, a long time ago? Why 28,800? Why 36 Ozen? Why those exact figures? Others think the numbers are astronomical, that they encode information about the stars. The way Earth wobbles on its axis, called precession, takes 25,920 years to complete one full cycle. The number 25,920 shows up in ancient texts from cultures all over the world. And if you do the math, many of these kingly reign numbers are related to that cycle. Multiples, fractions. As if the numbers are not about how long someone lived, but about how long they observed the sky, how many cycles they tracked, how much time passed while they watched the stars and recorded what they saw. But there is a third possibility. What if these numbers represent something else entirely? What if they are trying to tell us how long civilization existed before the flood? Not the reign of one man, but the span of an entire age. An era, a period of time so vast that we have no framework to understand it. What if the king list is saying, do not think we are the beginning. Do not think civilization is young. It is old, older than you can imagine. And the flood erased most of it. The tablets describe knowledge that came from before. They say the gods taught humans everything. How to farm, how to write, how to measure time, how to read the stars, how to build, how to make laws. The Sumerians did not claim to invent these things. They said they were taught by beings called the Apkallu, the 7 sages, wise ones who came after the flood and showed the survivors how to rebuild. The Apkallu are described as wearing robes made of fish scales, coming from the water, carrying tablets of knowledge, teaching kings and priests, showing them how to restore what was lost. Modern scholars call this mythology, symbolic language. But what if it is memory? What if the Apkallu were real people? Survivors of the pre-flood world who had more knowledge than those around them, who remembered the old ways, the old sciences, who walked into the ruined world after the water receded and taught the scattered, traumatized survivors how to start again. To those people, starving and lost, such teachers would have seemed like gods, like beings from another world, which, in a way, they were. They were from the world before, the world that drowned. The tablets describe what the Apkallu taught. They taught base 60 mathematics, the counting system we still use today without thinking about it. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. Why 60? Because it is a perfect number for dividing. You can split it evenly in so many ways. You can halve it, quarter it, divide it into thirds, fifths, sixths, tenths, twelfths. It is ideal for complex calculations, for measuring time, for astronomy, for building. But here is the question no one wants to ask. Why would early farmers need such a system? If you are just learning to plant wheat and raise goats, why do you need to divide a circle into 360 parts? Why do you need to track hours and minutes? You do not. Unless you inherited that system from someone who did need it, from a culture that was already advanced, that already had reasons to measure time precisely, to navigate by stars, to calculate angles, to build complex structures. The same pattern appears in astronomy. The Sumerians, things they should not know. They knew the year was 365 days long, not 360, not 365. They knew the moon took 29.5 days to go through its phases. They could predict eclipses years in advance. They tracked planets, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. They knew these were different from stars, that they moved, that they followed patterns. This is not casual observation. This is systematic record keeping. Watching the sky night after night, year after year. Writing it all down, comparing notes, building models. This takes time, generations, maybe centuries. Why would people just learning to farm invest that kind of effort into studying planets? Unless the knowledge came from before, from a time when watching the sky was essential, for navigation, for knowing when storms would come, for predicting floods, the kind of knowledge a seafaring people would need, a coastal civilization living by the rhythms of tide and star. And when the coasts drowned, when the sea rose and swallowed the lands where they lived, the survivors brought that star knowledge inland, taught it to their children, kept it alive, until finally someone wrote it down, made it permanent. At the city of Nippur, archaeologists found something remarkable, a scribal school, a place where boys learned to write. They practiced by copying tablets, the same texts over and over until their hands remembered the shapes. One exercise was a list of professions, over 100 different jobs: farmer, fisherman, priest, scribe, doctor, architect, metalworker, jeweler, musician, soldier, merchant, potter, weaver. The list goes on and on. Think about what that means. A society complex enough to have 100 specialized professions, where not everyone does everything, where there are experts, masters, people who spend their entire lives learning one skill. That does not happen overnight. That takes time, organization, infrastructure, education systems. That takes a civilization that has been stable and prosperous for a long time. But the Sumerian cities appear suddenly in the archaeological record. Around 4000 before the Common Era, there are small farming villages, there are towns. By 3000, there are cities with thousands of people, massive temples, writing, trade networks stretching hundreds of miles. In just 1,000 years, Mesopotamia goes from simple villages to urban civilization. That is not gradual evolution. That is an explosion. As if someone turned on a light. As if knowledge that had been sleeping suddenly woke up. As if survivors who had been scattered and struggling finally reached a point where they had enough people, enough resources, enough stability to start rebuilding what had been lost, to remember what their ancestors knew, to restore the old ways. The tablets talk about something called the Me, pronounced May. These were divine gifts, fundamental principles, knowledge given by the gods to humans. There were over 100 mini. Kingship was one, writing was one, music, mathematics, law, agriculture, medicine. All of the gods possessed them, guarded them, and occasionally gave them to chosen people, or sometimes humans stole them. There is a story about the goddess Inanna. She travels to the city of Eridu to visit her grandfather, the god Enki. Enki is the keeper of the Me, the guardian of knowledge. Inanna gets him drunk on beer. While he is not thinking clearly, she tricks him into giving her the Me. She loads them onto her boat and sails away. When Enki sobers up and realizes what happened, he sends creatures to chase her. But she escapes, and when she arrives at her city Uruk, everything changes. Overnight, Uruk gains writing, law, music, all the crafts and sciences, not gradually, instantly. Scholars call this mythology, symbolic storytelling about cultural development. But listen to it differently. What if it is memory, distorted memory of knowledge transfer, of a time when one group had information and another did not, when you had to travel to learn, to find teachers, to bring knowledge back home? What if the Me were real, not magical objects but bodies of knowledge, texts, techniques, sciences that could be taught, copied, shared? And if you had them, you could build a civilization. Without them, you stayed in darkness. That would explain why civilization appears in pockets, why some places advance while others do not, why there are sudden leaps, not because some humans are smarter, but because some have access to knowledge and others do not. And that knowledge, the tablets say clearly, came from before the flood, preserved by the Apkallu, the survivors, the ones who remembered. But there is something darker hidden in the tablets. After the flood, knowledge became controlled. Before the flood, the texts hint more people had access, more people could learn. But after things changed, knowledge was concentrated in temples, guarded by priests. Only certain people could read, only certain people could write, only certain people could enter the sacred spaces where the old tablets were kept. The common people could not read, could not write, could not access the libraries. They worked the fields, they paid taxes, they brought offerings to the temples, and they trusted that the priests, who could read the old tablets, would tell them what the gods wanted, would interpret the omens, would keep the calendar, would make sure the planting happened at the right time and the harvest was blessed. This is not accidental. This is structure, this is control. If you control knowledge, you control people. If only you can read, only you know the truth. Everyone else must trust you, must obey you, must depend on you. The tablets describe a world before the flood where things were different, where humans lived longer, learned more, had more direct access to the divine. But after the flood, boundaries were put in place. Humans were made weaker, shorter lived, more dependent. The gap between humans and gods widened, and the few humans who bridged that gap, the priests and kings, held all the power. Why? Why would the gods, or whoever the gods really were, want to limit humanity? The tablets give an answer. Because humanity had grown too strong before, too numerous, too loud, too chaotic, and that led to the decision to send the flood. So after the flood, measures were taken to make sure it would not happen again. Keep humans weaker, keep them divided, keep them forgetting, so they never again reach the point where they threaten the established order. This is the world the tablets describe, a world rebuilt from ruins, where knowledge exists but is locked away, where most people live and die without ever knowing the full story, without ever learning what their ancestors once knew. A world where memory is controlled, where the past is interpreted by those in power, where the common person must simply trust and obey. Sound familiar? The tablets were written 5,000 years ago, but the system they describe still shapes our world. The idea that knowledge belongs to experts, that common people should not question, that there is a chosen few who understand the deep truths and everyone else should simply listen and follow. This pattern is ancient, older than we imagined, and it started, the tablets say, after the flood, as a way to manage a traumatized population, to prevent chaos, to maintain order. But here is the question worth asking. What if that system was never meant to last forever? What if it was supposed to be temporary, a way to get through the crisis, to stabilize things? And then, once humanity recovered, once we grew strong again, we were supposed to open the libraries, share the knowledge, let everyone learn, let everyone read the tablets. But that never happened, because those in power realized something. It is easier to rule people who do not know, who cannot read, who must depend on you to tell them what is true. And so the system became permanent. The temples stayed closed, the tablets stayed guarded, and generation after generation grew up never knowing what their ancestors had written, never knowing what had been lost, never knowing that the world had ended once before and could end again. Until now, until the tablets were dug up, translated, shared, until anyone with curiosity can read what the Sumerians wrote, can see for themselves what the oldest human records say, can ask the questions that the priests and kings never wanted asked. The flood happened, the old world drowned, the survivors rebuilt, but they rebuilt with limits, with controls, with systems designed to keep most people in the dark. And those systems are still here, still operating, still shaping how we think about knowledge, authority, and truth. The tablets are witnesses, silent clay witnesses to a cycle that has repeated before and could repeat again. The rise, the fall, the flood, the rebuilding, the control, and maybe, just maybe, this time we can break the cycle. Not by preventing the flood. We cannot control the earth. We cannot stop the climate from changing or the seas from rising, but we can control what we do with knowledge. We can choose to share it, to teach it, to make sure that if the world ends again, the survivors have more than fragments, more than ruins, more than fading memories. They have the full story written down, preserved, waiting. The wind blows across the ruins of Eridu, the first city, the oldest city, the city where kingship was lowered from heaven, where the first temple was built, where the first priests read the first tablets. The walls are gone now, the temples are dust, but beneath the dust, beneath the layers of later civilizations, beneath the flood line, there are older foundations, older mysteries, older truths waiting to be uncovered. And every year, as the archaeologists dig deeper, as they translate more tablets, as they piece together the fragments, the story becomes clearer. We are not the first. Civilization has risen before, and it has fallen. And the only reason we know this is because someone 5,000 years ago chose to write it down, chose to press their words into clay, chose to bake it hard, chose to bury it where future generations would find it. They left us a message, not in a language we speak, not in words we recognize, but in clay that lasts, in stories that survive, in warnings carved deep so we could not miss them. The message is simple. This has happened before. It will happen again. The water will rise. The world will change. And when it does, what will you have preserved? What will you leave behind? What message will you write in stone or clay, or whatever lasts long enough to reach those who come after? The Sumerian tablets are not alone. That is the part that should make your skin prickle. Because if it was just one culture telling flood stories, you could dismiss it. Ancient people exaggerating a bad storm, turning a local disaster into myth. But it is not just one culture, it is hundreds. From every corner of the earth, separated by oceans, by mountains, by thousands of miles. Cultures that never met, never traded, never spoke the same language, and yet they all tell the same story. Water rising, world ending, a few survivors starting over. The details change, the names change, but the core is identical. As if they are all remembering the same event, describing the same catastrophe from different viewpoints. Like witnesses to an accident, each telling what they saw from where they stood. The specifics differ, but the truth underneath is the same. Something happened, something global, something that drowned coastlines, wiped out populations, and forced humanity to restart from scattered fragments. Let me take you around the world. Let me show you what they remember. In India, the ancient Vedic texts describe a flood sent to cleanse the earth. A man named Manu is warned by a fish, who is actually the god Vishnu in disguise. The fish tells him to build a boat. Manu obeys. The flood comes. Water covers everything. Manu's boat is pulled through the rising waters by the fish until it reaches a mountain peak. When the waters recede, Manu and the 7 sages aboard the boat are the only humans left. They repopulate the earth. They restore civilization. They pass down the knowledge that survived. In China, the Great Flood is central to the origin stories. The legend of Gun and Yu describes a catastrophic deluge that threatened to destroy humanity. Gun tried to stop it and failed. His son Yu succeeded by teaching people how to channel the waters, how to build dikes and canals, how to control the rivers. Yu becomes the founder of the Xia dynasty, the first true kingdom of China, born from the need to manage water, to prevent the flood from happening again. In Greece, the story is told as the myth of Deucalion and Pera. Zeus, angry at human corruption, sends a flood to wipe out the Bronze Age of humanity. Deucalion, warned by his father Prometheus, builds a chest. He and his wife ride out the flood for 9 days until the chest comes to rest on Mount Parnassus. They are the only survivors. They repopulate the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders, which become people. A strange detail, but underneath it is the same structure: flood, survival, restart. In Scandinavia, Norse mythology describes a flood of blood. When the giant Ymir is killed by the gods, his blood drowns the world. Only one family of giants survives by fleeing in a boat. From them, the new generation is born. The gods create the world anew. Midgard, the realm of humans, is fashioned from the body of the drowned giant. In Africa, dozens of tribes have flood traditions. The Maasai tell of a time when the rivers rose and covered the land. The Yoruba describe the god Obatala descending to a world covered in water and creating dry land so life could begin again. The Khoi people of southern Africa remember a great flood that destroyed the first people, and only a few survived in high mountains. In Australia, Aboriginal traditions going back tens of thousands of years speak of a time when the seas rose and swallowed the coastal lands. They describe specific places that were once dry and are now underwater. Places where their ancestors hunted and lived. They remember the water coming in, slowly at first, then faster, until the old lands were gone. In North America, the Ojibwe tell of a great flood sent to cleanse the earth. Only one man, Wainabuju, survives by floating on a log with a few animals. He sends a muskrat to dive down and bring back mud from the drowned earth. The muskrat succeeds, and from that mud, the new world is created. The Hopi describe emerging from previous worlds that were destroyed. One by fire, one by ice, one by flood. Each time a few people survive and carry forward into the next world. In South America, the Inca tell of a great flood sent by the god Viracocha. The water rose until it covered even the highest mountains. Only a few survived by fleeing to the peaks. When the waters receded, Viracocha descended and taught them how to farm, how to build, how to live. He showed them the old ways, the ways that had been lost. Then he walked across the ocean and disappeared. The Maya, the Aztec, the Mapuche, the Muisca, all have flood stories. All describe the same pattern: water rising, world drowning, divine beings returning afterward to teach the survivors how to rebuild. Over 200 cultures, every inhabited continent, all remembering the same disaster. This is not myth. This is inherited memory. Now let me show you the science. Because the memory is not just in stories, it is in the rocks, in the ice, in the bones, in the drowned cities we are only now beginning to find. Around 12,000 years ago, something catastrophic happened. The Earth's climate was already changing. The last ice age was ending. Massive glaciers that had covered North America, Europe, and Asia were melting. Slowly at first, then faster. The water had to go somewhere. It went into the oceans. But it did not happen smoothly. It happened in pulses. Scientists call them meltwater pulse events, sudden rapid releases of water as ice sheets collapsed. Sea levels did not rise gradually over thousands of years, they jumped, surged, rose dozens of feet in just a few decades. Coastlines changed almost overnight in geological terms. Meltwater pulse for around 14,600 years ago raised sea levels by 50 feet in less than 500 years. Meltwater pulse 1b around 11,500 years ago added another surge. By the time it was over, by the time the ice stopped melting, sea levels had risen over 400 feet from their lowest point during the Ice Age. Think about what that means. 400 feet. That is a 40-story building. Imagine coastal lands, river valleys, entire regions where humans for tens of thousands of years all underwater. Not slowly, not with centuries to adapt, but in a few generations. Your grandparents lived on the coast. Your parents watched the sea rise, you had to flee inland, and your children will never see the lands where your people lived since the beginning of memory. Where did these drowned lands exist? Everywhere. The entire global coastline shifted inland, but some places lost more than others. Doggerland, a massive land bridge connecting Britain to mainland Europe. During the Ice Age it was dry. Hills, valleys, rivers, forests. Archaeological evidence shows humans lived there, hunted there, made tools there. Then the sea rose. Slowly at first, the valleys became estuaries. The rivers, the hills became islands. And finally, around 500 years ago, the last of it went under. Britain became an island. And Doggerland became a memory, except no one remembered. Because it happened so long ago that by the time writing was invented, it was already ancient history, until modern fishermen started pulling up strange things in their nets. Bones, tools, mustard on tusks, antlers, worked flint. Evidence of a drowned world. Sonar mapping of the North Sea floor reveals river channels, valleys, lake beds, an entire landscape now 100 feet underwater where people once lived. The Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia, a massive expanse of land connecting Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand. During the Ice Age it was dry. It may have been one of the most fertile, resource-rich areas in the world, and it may have been heavily populated. When the ice melted, the sea rose. The Sunda Shelf went under. Thousands of square miles of coastline drowned. If there were cities there, if there were cultures there, they are now underwater. Unreachable, unknown. The Persian Gulf. During the Ice Age it was not a gulf, it was a river valley. The Tigris and Euphrates did not empty into the sea near the modern coastline. They flowed much farther, across what is now the Gulf floor, and met the ocean over 100 miles south of where it is today. Humans lived in that valley, hunted there, fished the rivers, built settlements. Then the sea rose. The valley flooded, became the Gulf, and everyone who lived there had to flee north, up the rivers, inland to higher ground. Where did they go? Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, and they brought their knowledge with them, their understanding of the stars, their mathematics, their building techniques, their memory of the old world, the world that drowned. In 2002, marine archaeologists using sonar found something off the coast of India near the city of Dwarka. Underwater ruins, stone structures, walls, pottery. They sent divers down. The structures were real, dated using thermoluminescence and other techniques to around 500 years ago, older than any known city, submerged when the sea rose. Hindu texts describe Dwarka as the golden city of Lord Krishna, a city that sank into the sea when Krishna died. Scholars always assumed it was myth, pure legend. But the ruins are real. They match the descriptions. They're exactly where the text said they would be. Myth becoming archaeology. Off the coast of Japan, near the island of Yonaguni, divers found massive stone structures underwater, flat platforms, right-angle corners, steps carved into rock channels, terraces. Some geologists say they are natural formations, wave erosion and tectonics creating shapes that look artificial. Others say the precision is too great, the symmetry too consistent, that these are built structures. And if they are, they were built when the sea level was lower, before the ice melted over 10,000 years ago. In the Mediterranean off the coast of Egypt near Alexandria, entire sections of the ancient city lie underwater. Archaeologists have mapped streets, statue buildings, all submerged by a combination of sea level rise and land subsidence. Cleopatra's palace is down there, somewhere in the murk, preserved by the water that drowned it. All over the world, coastlines that were dry during the Ice Age are now underwater. And the archaeological record on land shows something strange. Around 12,000 years ago there is a break, a gap. Many inland sites that were occupied for thousands of years show sudden abandonment. Populations disappear, cultures vanish. Then, a few thousand years later, new cultures appear. Different pottery, different tools, different languages. As if there was a reset, a break in continuity. A moment when everything stopped and had to start over. What caused this? The ice melting, the seas rising, but also something else. Something that made the melting faster, more chaotic, more catastrophic than it should have been. In the late 1990s, scientists studying ice cores from Greenland found something unexpected. A layer of sediment dated to around 12,900 years ago that contained high concentrations of platinum, nanodiamonds, spherules, microscopic particles that only form under extreme heat and pressure, the kind created by extraterrestrial impacts. At the same time, sediment layers from across North America and Europe showed evidence of massive wildfires. Soot, charcoal, burn layers covering thousands of square miles, as if entire continents had caught fire at once. The theory, still debated but gaining support, is that around 12,900 years ago, a fragmented comet or asteroid struck the northern ice sheets. Not a single impact, multiple airbursts and strikes across a wide area. The explosions melted billions of tons of ice, triggered massive floods, threw debris into the atmosphere, caused wildfires, disrupted the climate, and sent the Earth into a brief but intense cold period called the Younger Dryas. The Younger Dryas is named after a small Arctic flower that suddenly reappeared in European pollen records, a cold-adapted plant that had vanished during the warming period but came back when temperatures plunged. The cold snap lasted over 1,000 years. Glaciers that had been retreating surged south again. The warming stopped, and when it finally ended, when the climate stabilized again, the world was different. Many Ice Age megafauna were extinct: mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant sloths, all gone. Early human cultures in North America disappeared. The Clovis culture, the earliest well-documented people in the Americas, vanished from the archaeological record. And in the Near East, in Mesopotamia, something new began. Permanent settlements, agriculture, animal domestication, the first steps toward civilization, not gradually, suddenly, as if people who had been scattered and struggling suddenly came together and remembered how to do things. How to plant, how to build, how to organize. The survivors of the flood, that is what the tablets call them. The ones who lived through the catastrophe and passed down the knowledge. The Apkallu, the sages, the teachers. They were not gods, they were people. People who remembered the world before, who carried the knowledge forward, who taught the scattered, traumatized survivors how to start again. And the survivors listened, they learned, they rebuilt. But they also did something else. They made sure the memory would not be lost. They carved it into stone, they pressed it into clay. They wove it into songs and stories and sacred texts. They built monuments aligned to the stars so future generations would know, would remember, would understand that the world had ended once and could end again. The flood myths are not myths, they are memories, distorted by time, changed by language, wrapped in religious symbolism. But underneath they are real. They describe a real event, a global catastrophe, rising seas, collapsing glaciers, possibly an impact from space, a climate crisis that killed millions, that drowned coastlines, that forced humanity to flee inland, to start over, to rebuild from almost nothing. And here is the uncomfortable truth: it can happen again. The climate is always changing, ice ages come and go, sea levels rise and fall, asteroids still fly past Earth, some miss, some do not. We live on a dynamic planet, a living planet, and life on this planet has always been precarious, always one disaster away from extinction. But we have something the people before the flood did not have. We have their warning, written in clay, carved in stone, encoded in myths from every culture. They survived, they rebuilt, and they left us a message, not in words we speak, but in stories we still tell, in ruins we are only now beginning to understand. The message is simple: prepare, preserve, remember. Because the waters will rise again, the climate will shift again, and when it does, those who survive will need more than tools and food. They will need knowledge. They will need the memory of how things were done before. How to plant, how to build, how to organize, how to keep civilization alive when everything else is dying. The tablets were written 5,000 years ago, but they describe events 7,000 years older. Events their ancestors witnessed. Events so terrible they had to be written down so no one would forget. And we almost did forget. For centuries the tablets lay buried. The stories were dismissed as myth. The evidence was ignored. But the Earth keeps the records in ice cores, in sediment layers, in drowned cities, in the bones of extinct animals, in the sudden gaps in the archaeological record. The evidence is there, scattered, fragmented, but there, waiting for us to piece it together, to see the pattern, to understand what our ancestors were trying to tell us. The flood was real, the old world drowned, and the survivors, traumatized and scattered, rebuilt what they could, preserved what they remembered, and left us clay tablets baked hard so we would know, so we would remember, so we would be ready when it happens again. Because it will. The only question is when, and whether we will have the wisdom to listen to the warnings our ancestors left. Whether we will preserve the knowledge we have gained. Whether we will build monuments that will outlast the disaster. Whether we will write our truths in something that cannot burn, cannot rot, cannot be washed away. The wind blows across the Mesopotamian plain. The sun sets over the ruins of Shuruppak, the city where Zusodra built his boat, where the flood began. The walls are gone. The houses are dust. But beneath the dust, beneath the flood layer, there are older foundations. Proof that people lived there before. Proof that the story is real. Proof that the world ended once and had to start again. And in museums around the world, clay tablets sit in drawers, each one pressed by hands long dead, each one carrying a message, a warning, a memory waiting for those brave enough to read them, patient enough to listen, wise enough to understand. The flood happened. It will happen again. The only question is what we do with that knowledge. So what was lost? That is the question that haunts anyone who reads these tablets. Anyone who looks at the drowned coastlines. Anyone who sees the gap in the archaeological record, the break, the moment when everything stopped and had to start over. What did we lose when the water rose? What knowledge? What cities? What achievements? What understanding of the world did our ancestors possess that we are only now beginning to rediscover? The tablets give hints, fragments. They describe a time before the flood when humans lived longer, when knowledge was passed down perfectly from teacher to student because there was time, centuries to learn, to master skills, to understand the deep patterns of nature. But after the flood, lifespans were shortened, memory became fragile, each generation had to relearn what their parents knew. And with each cycle, a little more was forgotten. They describe cities that are now underwater, or buried so deep under silt and later construction that we may never find them. Cities that were old even 5,000 years ago, that had been standing for thousands of years before the Sumerians carved the first tablet. Cities whose names are mentioned in the king list, but whose locations are lost. Where was the city of Bad Tibera? The tablets say it was the second city, a place of metalworkers, where copper and bronze were first smelted, where the secrets of fire and metal were kept. Archaeologists think they have found it, a site called Tel al-Madain. But when they dig, they find layers upon layers. And at the bottom, beneath everything else, beneath the flood line, there are traces of even older occupation. Fragments of pottery that do not match anything from later periods. As if the people who lived there first were different. And then they were gone, and others came later and built on the ruins without knowing what lay beneath. Where was Larak? The tablets say it was ruled by the god Pabilsag, that it was a center of healing. But no one knows where it was. The site has never been found. It is mentioned in ancient texts, it existed, but the location is lost, drowned, buried, erased. And those are the cities we know about, the ones mentioned in the tablets. How many others were there? Cities built on the coasts, on river deltas, in valleys that are now underwater. Cities that thrived during the Ice Age when the sea was lower and the climate was different. Cities that left no record because they were drowned before writing was invented, before anyone thought to carve their names in stone. Think about the geography. During the Ice Age, sea levels were 400 feet lower. That means coastlines extended far beyond where they are today. The continental shelves, now underwater, were dry land. And those shelves are huge. Thousands of square miles. Fertile, rich in resources, perfect for human settlement. If you were a human living 15,000 years ago, you would not live in the mountains. Mountains are cold, difficult. Resources are scarce. You would live on the coast, near rivers, near the ocean, where fish are abundant, where shellfish can be gathered, where migratory birds stop, where the land is flat and easy to build on. That is where humans have always preferred to live, on the coasts. And all those coasts are now underwater. Every single Ice Age coastline is gone, submerged, unreachable without submarines and sonar and diving equipment. We have barely begun to explore them. We have mapped more of the surface of Mars than we have of the ocean floor on our own planet. And what little we have found is tantalizing. Ruins, structures, pottery, tools, evidence that yes, people lived there. But we do not know who they were, what they built, what they knew, because the ocean is a good preserver in some ways. Cold, dark, low oxygen. Things can survive down there for thousands of years, but it is also a harsh environment. Corrosion, currents, sedimentation. Anything made of wood is gone. Anything made of bone is dissolved. Only stone survives. And even stone, after 10,000 years underwater, becomes covered in marine growth. Looks like a natural formation, hard to distinguish from the surrounding geology. So when we look at underwater structures, when divers find something that looks artificial, the debate begins. Natural or man-made, rock formation or ruin. The default assumption is always natural, because accepting that it is artificial means accepting that someone built it when the area was above water, which means it is over 10,000 years old, which means it predates all known civilizations, and that is uncomfortable. That challenges the timeline, the narrative, the neat story of human progress we have been taught. but the evidence keeps accumulating. Dwarka off the coast of India, Yonaguni off Japan, structures in the Mediterranean, off Cuba, off the Bahamas, each one debated, each one controversial, but together they form a pattern. They suggest that yes, people were building in stone during the Ice Age, on coastlines that are now submerged, and when the ice melted and the water rose, those structures were abandoned, left behind, drowned. The people who built them did not disappear. They moved inland, they migrated up rivers, to higher ground, to places where they could start again. And they brought their knowledge with them, their understanding of astronomy, of mathematics, of organizing societies, but much was lost, because you cannot carry a library when you are fleeing a flood. You cannot transport massive stone tools. You can only carry what fits in a boat, what you can remember, what you can teach to your children. And so the knowledge survived in fragments, incomplete, distorted, passed down through oral tradition until finally someone invented writing and could make it permanent, could carve it in clay, could build monuments that encoded the old wisdom in geometry and alignment, so that even if language changed, even if cultures fell, the knowledge would remain in stone, waiting to be rediscovered. This is what the tablets are trying to tell us, that we are not the first. That civilization is not a straight line climbing from primitiveness to modernity. It is a cycle: rise, peak, fall, rebuild, rise again, and the fall is not always gradual. Sometimes it is sudden, catastrophic, a flood, an impact, a climate shift. And when it happens, most of what was built is lost. Most of what was known is forgotten, and the survivors have to start over with scraps. The Sumerians knew this. That is why they were obsessed with preservation, with writing everything down, with making copies of copies, with building their temples on high platforms so the floods would not reach them, with baking their tablets so fire and water could not destroy them. They were terrified of forgetting, of losing again what had been lost before, and they left us a warning, encoded in their stories, in their mathematics, in their astronomical observations. They tracked the stars for a reason, not just to predict when to plant crops, but to watch for the long cycles, the patterns that repeat over thousands of years, the precession of the equinoxes, the wobble of the Earth's axis that takes 20 years to complete. They knew about this cycle. They encoded it in their monuments, in their king list, in the numbers they used. Why? Because cycles repeat. If you can track the cycle, you can predict when the next shift will come, when the climate will change, when the stars will align in the same pattern they did before, when the conditions that led to catastrophe last time will return. And if you know it is coming, you can prepare, you can build higher, you can move inland before the water rises, you can preserve the knowledge before the disaster strikes. This is the gift the Sumerians tried to give us, a warning written in stars and stone, a map of time, a way to see the pattern, but we forgot how to read it. We dismissed their astronomy as superstition, their mathematics as primitive, their flood stories as myth. We stopped listening to the warnings our ancestors left because we thought we knew better, because we believed we had outgrown the need for ancient wisdom. But the earth does not care what we believe. The cycles continue. The climate shifts. The ice melts. The seas rise. Not because of anything we did, though our actions certainly accelerate some processes, but because that is what Earth does. It changes. It always has. And species that do not adapt go extinct. Civilizations that do not prepare collapse. We are living through one of those shifts right now. The climate is warming. The ice is melting. Sea levels are rising. Coastlines are beginning to flood. Not as fast as they did 12,000 years ago, not yet, but the process has begun, and we have a choice. We can ignore it, dismiss it, pretend it is not happening, or we can listen to the warnings our ancestors left, can learn from what they experienced, can prepare while there is still time. The tablets tell us what to preserve. Not wealth, not gold, not monuments to kings, but knowledge. How to farm, how to build, how to organize, how to measure time, how to read the stars, how to heal the sick, how to maintain order when everything is falling apart. That is what matters. That is what allows a civilization to rebuild after catastrophe. Not weapons, not palaces, but the fundamental knowledge of how to survive. And the tablets tell us how to preserve it, in durable materials, in multiple copies, in distributed locations so that if one library burns, others remain, in simple language that can be understood even if the culture changes, in monuments that encode information in geometry so that even if writing is lost, the knowledge remains in stone, in songs and stories that people will repeat even if they do not understand the deeper meaning, in systems that are redundant, resilient, designed to outlast disaster. The Sumerians did this. They left us their knowledge in clay, baked hard, buried in multiple cities, copied over and over for thousands of years, and it worked. We are reading their words 5,000 years later. We are learning what they knew. We are beginning to understand the warnings they left. But here is the question we must ask ourselves. What are we leaving behind? If our civilization collapses tomorrow, if the power goes out and never comes back on, if the internet disappears and all our digital records are lost, what will survive? What will future archaeologists find when they dig through our ruins 5,000 years from now? Not much. Our knowledge is stored on devices that require electricity, on servers that require maintenance, on hard drives that degrade in decades, on formats that become obsolete in years. We have more information than any civilization in history, but almost none of it is durable. Almost none of it will survive if the systems that support it fail. We have made the same mistake the pre-flood civilizations made. We have built on sand, on fragile foundations. We have assumed the systems will always be there, that the power will always flow, that the internet will always work, that someone else will maintain the infrastructure. And if we are wrong, if those systems fail, future generations will look back at us and see a dark age, a gap in the record, a time when people must have existed, must have known things, but left almost nothing behind, unless we change. Unless we start thinking like the Sumerians, unless we begin preserving our most important knowledge in durable forms, in books printed on acid-free paper, in stone monuments, in simple technologies that do not require complex infrastructure, in educational systems that teach fundamentals, not just how to use devices, in communities that maintain practical skills like farming, building, healing, skills that will matter when the complex systems fail. The tablets are not just a record of the past, they are a guide for the future. They show us what matters, what lasts, what allows a species to survive when everything else is falling apart. They are a message from people who lived through the end of the world and rebuilt, who know what it takes, who are trying to tell us, across 5,000 years, what we need to do. Listen to them, learn from them, preserve what matters. Teach your children not just how to use technology, but how to think, how to solve problems, how to survive without it. Build communities that can function without electricity, without supply chains, without governments, not because we want those systems to fail, but because history teaches us they will, eventually, and when they do, the people who survive will be the ones who prepared, who remembered, who kept the knowledge alive. The wind passes over the ruins one last time, over over Eridu, over Nippur, the great cities of Sumer, the first cities, or perhaps not the first, perhaps the rebuilt cities, the cities that rose from the ruins of even older ones, cities whose foundations rest on flood silt, on the memory of disaster, on the determination to survive. The sun is setting now. The sky turns orange and purple, the same colors it turned 5,000 years ago when a Sumerian scribe finished pressing marks into a clay tablet, carried it to the kiln, baked it hard, stored it in the temple library, not knowing if anyone would ever read it, not knowing if the knowledge would survive, but hoping, believing, trusting that the future would care, would remember, would learn. And here we are, the future they wrote for, reading their words, learning their lessons, receiving their warning. The water rose once, it will rise again. The world ended once, it will end again. But the ending is not final, it never is. Because somewhere always there are survivors, people who remember, who carry forward, who rebuild, who pass down the knowledge to the next generation, who refuse to let the story end. We are those survivors, descendants of people who lived through catastrophes we can barely imagine.
Ice ages, floods, impacts,
Collapses, wars, and yet here we are, still learning, still building, still reaching toward the stars our ancestors watched and wondered about. The tablets have given us their gift, the knowledge that we have survived before, that the cycle is old, that the pattern repeats, that endings are also beginnings, that the flood, when it comes, is not the end of the story, just the end of a chapter. And now it is our turn to leave something behind, our turn to write on clay, to carve in stone, to encode in monuments, to teach in stories, to preserve what matters so that when the water rises again, when the next catastrophe comes, the survivors will have what they need. Not just to survive, but to rebuild, to remember, to know they are not alone, that others have walked this path, that the cycle continues, that humanity endures. And so we return to this moment, to wherever you are right now, listening to these words, carried across time and space, from a Sumerian scribe to you, from the past to the present, from those who survive to those who will. The tablets have spoken, the evidence has been laid out, the warning has been given, and now the choice is yours. Will you listen? Will you prepare? Will you preserve? Will you become one of the survivors who carries the knowledge forward, who refuses to let it be lost, who builds something that will last? If this journey through drowned worlds and ancient warnings has touched you like this video, subscribe if you want to keep exploring the deep patterns, the old memories, the truths that survive in clay and stone and story. Your support keeps these messages alive, keeps the questions being asked, keeps the search for understanding going, and maybe that is the most important thing we can do. Not just preserve knowledge, but preserve the desire to seek it, the willingness to question, the courage to look at the evidence and change our minds. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough about the past to let it change how you see the future. The tablets were written for you. The monuments were built for you. The warnings were encoded for you. But you, as in humanity, as in the future, as in the ones who come after, our ancestors survived the flood. They rebuilt, they preserved, they passed it forward. And now it is in our hands. The knowledge, the responsibility, the choice. What will we do with it? What will we leave behind? What message will we write for those who come after us? The clay is waiting. The stone is ready. The story is not finished. And perhaps that is the greatest truth the tablets teach us, that the story never finishes. It just continues. One generation to the next, one cycle to the next, one ending becoming another beginning. The water will rise, the world will change. But memory endures. Knowledge survives. And somewhere, always, there are survivors, carrying forward, building again, remembering, writing it down. So the next generation will know, will learn, will prepare. The tablets have done their job. They survived 5,000 years to reach us. Now it is our turn to survive, to pass it forward. So that 5,000 years from now someone will dig up what we left behind. We'll read our words. We'll learn our lessons. We'll know they are not the first. We'll understand the cycle. We'll be ready. Until the next mystery calls us back into the buried places, may you rest well. May your questions lead you somewhere true. And may you remember, when the waters rise, that others have been here before. That the flood is not the end. That survivors carry forward. That knowledge endures. Good night, and thank you for listening.